Morning, everyone. You may notice that Dr. Ella Simmons was actually scheduled for this week for the sermon. I understand that her grandson was involved in a very, very serious car accident last week, and she was called down to attend to him. And so, as a result of that, you're stuck with me. I can find a clicker here. In looking through the bulletin, I notice on the front page, the cover page, the motto that was adopted some time ago by our church here. It's called Loving, Serving, and Healing. I don't know whether you ever entertained the idea of what missions are all about, but I'd like to raise the issue this morning of whether our church is a mission church and whether our church fulfills requirements of missions. All right. Okay. I ask that we bow our heads and pray right now. Our kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we're so thankful, Lord, for all the many blessings that you give us, the manifestations of your love and your grace. We invite your presence this morning, Lord. Come amongst us. Open our mind. Give us a clear head. Give us the message that you would like for us to have. This I pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. Tony mentioned the atmospheric quality we've been dealing with in the last week or so. It's only been the last couple of days that I've actually had a voice. Before that, I squeaked. And so I'm glad that I'm finally getting my voice back. I would like for you to turn your Bibles. Please, everybody, let's read this together. To Matthew 25, I'll be reading verses 31 through 40. And if you don't have a Bible, there are Bibles in the pew in front of you. This is Matthew 25, verses 31 through 40. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right and the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him as saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly, I say to you, as you did it to one of these, the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me." Now, when I was a kid in the old Pee Wee Valley Church, occasionally missionaries would come by. And they would usually have a sermon or a talk, and they would talk about their adventures, usually in far and exotic places. Africa, India, South Asia, South America. And I used to be enthralled with their stories, and I'd think, wow, that's something that's really cool. That is something that is really impressive. I wonder if I'd ever be able to do that. Now, bear in mind, what I had pictured at that time as a missionary's role was sitting under the trees with a picture roll and reading to the natives and telling these people what they needed to know about salvation and about Jesus. That's what I thought. Now, life went on, and through the years, I changed my attitudes a little bit about those things. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a homegrown boy. I grew up in Pee Wee Valley, and for 46 years, I was faculty at the University of Louisville. And during that period of time, I wore a number of different hats. And one of the things that I became impressed with is the spectrum of human need. And in the late 1990s, I was approached by some administrators at the university, and he wanted to know if I would be interested in participating in a project that they were beginning. And this project was called the International Service Learning Project. And this project was a multidisciplinary project. It was something that at one time there were 13 different disciplines involved in this project. We had medical people, we had dental people, we had justice administration people, we had communication people, we had urban planners, we had engineers. It was a multifaceted program. And the thrust of the program was to spread intellectual capital. Now, we didn't have a whole lot of financial support to work with, but we had people who were motivated and people who had knowledge and people who knew how to do things and how to solve problems. And so this program was conceived to find places in the world that each of these disciplines could fit into. These places that perhaps needed counsel in justice administration, or how to communicate, how to market, how to develop infrastructure, how to plan an urban environment, all of these kinds of issues. And anyway, we began meeting together, and this took if you can imagine, this was a rather large project. The logistics alone were very, very daunting. And so anyway, we met for close to a year discussing, okay, what are we going to do? What do we want to do? What do we hope to accomplish? Where do we want to accomplish this, and where do we want to go? Well, one of the faculty had a teaching assistant who was from the country of Belize. Now, Belize is a Central American country. It's not an island. A lot of people think it's an island. It's not. It's on the coast. But anyway, we decided to look at Belize as a possible site to develop the International Service Learning Program. Now, Belize is formerly known as British Honduras. It lies on the eastern Caribbean coast of Central America. It's bounded in the north by Mexico, in the south by Guatemala, and there are a lot of islands along the coastline. And they refer to these as cays there, or keys we would call them. And they are sheltered by the second largest barrier reef in the world. The largest, of course, is off the coast of Australia. And it's an incredibly beautiful tropical venue. There are parts of the country that are breathtakingly beautiful, and there are other parts of the country that are awful. You wonder who owns it and why would they want to. It's like that. It's a country that is roughly the size of Connecticut, the state of Connecticut. It's about 200 and some odd miles in length, a little over 100 miles in width. The climate is subtropical. It's not tropical, it's subtropical. About 80 degrees is the median temperature. Now, it can get a lot hotter than that, but it never drops much below 60 degrees. And there's usually the trade winds off of the ocean. The dry season, there are two seasons basically, wet season, dry season. The dry season runs from February to May, and there's usually a little bit of a dry spell in August, and otherwise it's rainy. And anyway, the estimated population as of today is around 400,000. Now, at the time that we began working there, the population was estimated about 250,000. So think about it, an area of about the size of Connecticut, 250,000 people. So it wasn't very densely populated. And most of that population was centered in what we would call urban areas. Now, the population was composed of Creole. These are people of African descent. Mestizo, Spanish/Maya. The Garifuna, who were they were Caribbean individuals that were there in the Caribbean islands that migrated to the mainland. There are also a number of people, Spanish and East Indian descent. We saw a fair number of Indian folks while we were there. And the Vietnamese, surprisingly, were moving into the area. Again, immigration policies being what they were moving into it. And also some Chinese. And there was a small Mennonite community as well. Come on, clicker. All right, religion. About 62% of the population nominally are Roman Catholic, but there are other religions, including the Baptist, Methodist, some Seventh-day Adventists, and there were some various other Protestants. Now, some other stuff. The official language is English. However, Spanish is widely spoken, and there's a whole bunch of local dialects that some are Maya. In fact, I think there's about 4 or 5 different Maya dialects alone, and none of them understand each other. They're all different. The currency is the Belizean dollar, which one Belizean dollar is equal to 50 cents of the U.S. dollar. It's tied to the value of the U.S. dollar. And why that came to be, I have no idea. Now, the health of the country in general is relatively free of endemic diseases. However, when we were working there, HIV was getting to be a significant issue. And we were very, very concerned about that because their healthcare system left a lot to be desired. Now, there are a few hospitals. There's only one hospital in the country that would be equal to what we would consider Western standards. Something where you or I could go and kind of expect to be cared for, much like we would be cared for here. The rest of them are abysmal. To call them hospitals is a generosity that they don't need. There's a few clinics that are scattered around, usually operated by private individuals, and there are a few private doctors. Now, this last thing is kind of shocking in a way. The literacy rate is over 93%. Now, take a guess of what the literacy rate is in this country, the United States. 84%. So they have a better literacy rate than we do. Now, in working in Belize, we decided that, first of all, we did some investigatory trips. And we went to different places. The first time I was in Belize, I was all over that country. And we went by water, by air. The main north-south route through the country at that time was largely a dirt road. And there were holes that would eat a school bus in the road. And it was impassable during the rainy season. But anyway, we ultimately decided that we were going to locate at the town of Dangriga. Now, Dangriga is south of the commercial capital of the country, which was Belize City. And we went to Dangriga initially because there was a population there, I'm guessing probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 to 2,000 people, a developing urban area where people on our team that had the expertise to help plan these infrastructures, people who could help with justice administration, because policing, at the very least, was an interesting thing. And there were other issues that we thought maybe we could help. Anyway, we learned while we were there, though, that there was a little village that the government told us, and let me digress just a minute. In doing these kinds of projects, we found that you have to work through the governments. If you don't, you get basically cut off at the knees. And you let the governments sort of set your agenda. And that way you're able to cross borders, you're able to operate within the country pretty much easily. Now, one of the things too that we discussed and came to the conclusion, for all of our technological excellence and all of our capabilities, everything that we as an advanced country, citizens of an advanced country, have to offer, all of those cunningly devised answers amount to nothing if the questions haven't been asked. Now, I want you to think about that. The application that I'd like for us to draw is, you know what, if you are going to, let's say you're concerned about your neighbor and your neighbor's spiritual condition as you see it, okay, and you want to help him with that. But your neighbor doesn't perceive that they've got a problem with that. How do you think your efforts will be received by your neighbor to take care of their spiritual issues, which they may or may not have? Okay? That's the conclusion that we drew, was we don't need to offer answers to questions that haven't been asked. So we were told by the government, we worked through from the prime minister on down. They have a parliamentary form of government in Belize, and through respective cabinet ministers and so forth. We were told that there was this group of people, this little village that was located on an inland lagoon. There was an 18-mile dirt path to get to it. There were only two ways in there. You could go that way or by water. And to get to it by water, you had to come down the coast out in the Atlantic Ocean and then go back up through the Belize River into this lagoon system. Anyway, this little village lay about 3 miles or so inland from the ocean. And so I took a trip and went down to see this village, and was immediately blown away by it. It was one of those things that I didn't expect. We were told by the government that the people that lived there, and depending upon who you talk to, there was anywhere from 350 to 500 individuals. And they were scattered along a peninsula that ran roughly about 1.25 miles up from the south into this southern lagoon. And that these people were descendants of African slaves that had been employed in the mahogany trade some 200 years before by the British. And they had been set free and have lived there essentially ever since. There were 4 or 5 family names. Everybody lived together pretty much, and it was a very, very interesting and insulated society because of their isolation. Also, they were in the middle of 2 overlapping political districts. Now, politics in Belize, not fundamentally different from politics in eastern Kentucky or Jefferson County. Because these districts overlapped, neither district felt like they were responsible for these folks, and as a result, they got nothing from the government. And the government's perspective was that they were unemployable. They were lazy, and they couldn't work for anybody. And if there was ever a place that needed help, it was them. And so anyway, we decided to go check this village out. Now this is Main Street, Gales Point. Okay? This village lay along a peninsula that I said was about a mile and a quarter or so in length. The width of the peninsula varied anywhere from about 200 yards wide to down to about 30 feet. And it was a very interesting place. Now you see these trees or the remnants of it laying around. Now this picture was taken back in probably 1999. And this is the aftermath of Hurricane Hattie, which had hit that area in 1960. And you see stuff still there. Now, you notice the individual that's reclining there in the shade? Looks pretty comfortable, right? This was a new house that was being built at the time. And we looked at the construction of it, and I'll tell you what, I wouldn't want to be in that much of a wind. I'm afraid it'd blow away. I thought this was an interesting place. This was Mrs. T's kitchen. Now, if you wanted to have a pizza, you could have a pizza for $1, cookies for $3 for $1, tostadas 2 for $1. It sounds like a happening sort of a place, right? People had their possessions scattered around them, and most of those possessions are things that were cast off from somebody else. You would see, chickens running around and dogs, really cur-looking dogs. And it was not the pristine tropical paradise that you would expect. There was a family of 6 that lived in this little house. And you notice the roofing is not all the same color. This particular home, this drumming is a big part of their culture. And it's fascinating, the percussion, the different levels of sound that you can get from a homemade drum. Quite musical. And it's almost like a language of itself. And we had one of our team one year was a guy that was a musicologist. He was a PhD that studied music. And he made a special trip to come down and visit with the village drummers and drum makers to find out where that music came from. And sure enough, there were percussive patterns that came from Africa, came from the Caribbean basin and so forth. And he was able to document all of that. I think he wrote 6 different papers about it after it was all over with. And one of my most pleasant memories was sitting under the palm trees with the drummers one afternoon, listening to these guys do their thing with the drums. And they were professional about it. They would say, now, they'd play a particular pattern or a particular lick, and they'd say, now this comes from such and such a tribe in such and such an area of Africa. And they put this all together into a musical form, and it was fascinating to see that in action. Now, notice the color of this house. Paint was like liquid gold. The reason was because you couldn't hardly get any, and when you did, it was very, very valuable, and you took whatever you could get. Now, the Porter Paint Company right here in Louisville gave our team 14,000 gallons of paint to take to Belize. Now, I don't know whether you have any idea how much space that takes up or the logistics involved in doing that. But anyway, we were able to get it United Parcel transported it to New Orleans for us. But we had to cut a deal with one of the local kingpins down in Belize, who happened to control one of the shipping ports and owned a series of freighters. We had to cut a deal with him in order to get the paint taken to Belize. And then he got a part of that paint, and the rest of it went out in the general population. And you had to do business that way. That was the only way that you could. But anyway, you would see some very, very interesting colors scattered around town, and a lot of the places the paint was very, very lacking. This was one of the more prosperous dwellings there. This was a post office. This church was really the only church building in the whole village. This was a Catholic church. And really the only thing I ever saw it used for, I saw it used once for a funeral and once for a wedding. And otherwise there was never anybody around. So I wanted to say something about the spirituality of the people in general. They were a hybrid in their religious outlooks. For the most part, they bought into elements of Christianity, but there was also a cultural animism that went with it. You know, they still believed in evil spirits and other things like that affected their lives and became part of their religious custom. And I remember one of the old elders in the town, he and I got to be good buddies, and he told me an interesting story. He says, we were talking about mission work, and he says to me, he says, he says, the missionaries, they come and they visit, and we like to see them. He says, 3 weeks ago, the Baptists come. Everybody be Baptist. 2 weeks ago, the Methodists come. Everybody be Methodist. Then the Catholics come. Everybody be Catholic. But when they go home, we are what we are. And I thought that was very profound, very profound. This is the narrowest part of the peninsula, and at this point it was 30 feet wide, and you can see water on both sides. This water was incredible. It was very clear. The fish, you didn't even have to have bait. I mean, you could, if anything shiny, you could throw it in water and the fish would hit it. It was a little bit of an epiphany for me because, you know, I looked at this village and I thought to myself, well, it's easy to see why these people don't have anything. They don't do nothing. They don't work. It didn't seem that anyone was gainfully employed. And then it occurred to me, well, they live in a climate that generally is somewhere between 60 degrees and 90 degrees. I don't know about you, but that's a comfort zone for me. It very seldom ever rains, but when it does, all they need is shelter from the rain or the sun, and they can get that locally from palm trees and what have you, and build these shelters and stuff that they can scrounge around and put together. Doesn't cost them anything. Because of the climate, they don't have to have sophisticated heating and air conditioning systems. It doesn't cost much money. They don't really have to raise any crops because there's a spectrum of tropical fruits and vegetables around just for the taking. 6 different varieties of palm trees down there. Coconut palm. And I'll tell you what, fresh coconut right off the tree is a true delight. It's a true delight. And there's some therapeutic value. Being a white boy, going to that part of the country, that part of the world, when I got off the airplane, the bug said fresh meat. One time when I got off the airplane here in Louisville, Betty said to me she was surprised that they let me back in the country. I looked like I had smallpox. But anyway, this one particular time I was there, man, I was on fire. I mean, the bugs had just really chewed on me. And one of the old boys there in the village says, oh, man, says, we got to take care of that. And so shinny up a palm tree, took a coconut, brought it down, and a machete that was about this long, whacked the end of the coconut off, and there's the milk in it. And he says, here, drink this. And so coconut milk, like I said, really good right off the tree. Then he proceeded to dissect the coconut, took the meat out of it, took his machete, chopped it up into a really fine kind of a mess, and then smeared that all over my on firearms, and it was like flipping a switch. Pain was gone. Pain was gone. So there's therapeutic value in fresh coconuts. Now this was a village center. This was a building that was built in the aftermath of Hurricane Hattie. It was a place that served a lot of different functions. There was a little school there. There was the town library, which consisted of a bunch of old National Geographic magazines and a few cast-off books of other stuff. The upper part of it, this whole section up in here, was wide open. And we decided to use that as our clinic. We set this little room here up. It was empty. We set that up as our pharmacy operation. And anyway, this was probably the most secure building in the whole area. And like I said, it was designed for people to ride out hurricanes and storms. Now, the group of people that you see here was not the whole team, okay? There were roughly 100 individuals involved in it, and this was the team that we brought to Gales Point to take care of issues in Gales Point. There's yours truly right there. These were composed of physicians, dentists, medical students, medical residents, pharmacists, communication people, and so forth. And this became the operating group right there in Gales Point. Now, the logistics, very, very important. Every day we had briefings after briefings after briefings, so everybody be on the same page. Any issues that would come up, we'd be able to deal with, and we took care of it along those lines. The top floor of the building, we decided we were going to set up our clinic, and this was a combination medical and dental clinic. Some of the people that were involved here, this was the Dean of Admissions from the medical school, Mary Coleman. This is Mary Ann Huddy. She was in charge of the nursing program and also the nurse practitioners program, and the others were students. Big part of this project was to document everything we did. We felt it was important to be able to give reports to the government, and also for us to have a demographic profile or spectrum of the community and what the individual health needs were and other issues that we were interested in knowing about. So we spent a lot of time interviewing people, and there was some other things we did, screening. This gentleman's getting a blood test for diabetes. Diabetes was one of the issues that we had to deal with. In the clinic, it was a little, because big open room, we decided, well, how can we break this down into like examination rooms, because we're going to be offering the spectrum of medical care and dental care and stuff. And, you know, people, even though small community, everybody knew everybody, we weren't so sure everybody wanted to know what everybody else's business was. So we devised a series of clotheslines that supported sheets, and we worked out exam rooms and areas. And these are just some examinations that were going on. And it's welcoming patients to the exam room. This Dr. Jay Huddy. Jay was a PhD pharmacologist that was also a pharmacist. And anyway, one of the things that we decided that we needed to do was to provide medications for the conditions that we encountered there. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in a little bit. But we're very fortunate, you know, in the university community, there were a lot of resources, a lot of connections. And we were able to transport a large amount of medications. I remember one notable year we took over $350,000 worth of medications down with us. And we were able to give every individual in the city, in the little village of Gales Point, vitamins for a year. They had a year's supply of vitamins. Likewise, they had a year's supply of toothpaste and toothbrushes, which again were like gold. I had connections in the industry, and we were able to get these things donated to us. There were other medical things that we were able to get as well. So anyway, it's quite the project. This is one of my dental students setting up our dental equipment. Now, you may have noticed in some of the pictures power lines. Okay, electricity was totally unpredictable. The power grid of the country at that time, with the exception of the northern part of the country up near Mexico, you see see trains going up and down the tracks here, right? These railroad locomotives that are pulling the trains. All right, they were electric locomotives. The entire power grid of Belize was powered by 5 stationary railroad locomotives. And they had these scattered around the country, and they were enclosed in steel buildings, kind of like Quonset huts. And they would run these diesel locomotives during certain periods of the day and feed that energy, the electricity that they generate, out into a power grid. Now, I took measurements when I first went down there because I was aware that this was the situation. And I found if there was electricity at all, it varied anywhere from 84 volts to 135 volts, anywhere from 50 cycles per second to almost 70 cycles per second. Now, standard here in our country is 120 volts, 60 cycles per second. And if you take equipment that's designed to run on that and you subject it to 85 volts at 50 cycles per second, guess what? It goes up in smoke. Okay, so we had to be very, very ingenious about the way we engineered our equipment, because like in my business, in dentistry, you got to have what you got to have if you're going to do the deed, and so we engineered our equipment to meet the local situation. And this was a learning experience for our students. They were incorporated into all of this. Everybody that you saw in that big picture there was cross-trained. If somebody couldn't do a particular job, they got sick or something like that, there was somebody who could step in and do their job. And it didn't matter what it was. I mean, I had people who had never been around dentistry other than being on the receiving end of it, that served as assistants to me. And vice versa. There were a lot of different improvisations that were required. This was our dental clinic that we set up. And it was primitive, but it was effective. And I'll tell you something, it was the best those people had had. And that's what made the difference. One of the things, and I'll show you some pictures in a minute, that people were interested in, I was told by the village council when we first got there, I sat down with them, they called a meeting together, and I sat down with them and I said, I'm from America. I have no politics. I have no agenda. I'm just a fellow human being extending a hand of help to my fellow brothers and sisters. If there's anything that I could do for you that would be possible for me to do for you, what would it be? And they looked at me astonished. And so they were astonished by that. And they very politely discussed amongst themselves for about 10 minutes or so. And then they gave me a list. 8 things. Okay? And guess what? They didn't ask for money. In no way. At the very top of the list was, they said, many of our people no longer smile because they don't have any front teeth. And I said, well, why do they not have any front teeth? And they said, well, they eat stone bass. Now, stone bass is a little perch-like looking fish that was native to that area. And I will tell you, it's not the stone bass that causes the problem, because I saw kids popping the tops off of pop bottles with their teeth. Okay, and sugar was well endowed in that area. Sugarcane was a local crop. Okay, they said, you know, the missionaries, they come and we appreciate what they do, but they pull our teeth. Is there any way maybe you could save those? Possibly. We'll see what we can do. And so on. Went down the list, and there were a number of, there were a few little health issues and what have you. But I told them, I said, I will take this back to our larger group. We'll discuss it, and I'll be back. And we'll bring the team with us. So anyway, the false teeth aspect of this operation from our vantage point was very, very important. So we set up our own little dental lab. And I had trained these students before we went down there how to make false teeth. They'd come out to the office after school and after work, and we'd send out for pizza, and then we'd make false teeth. And that's how they learned how to do this. And so this was our dental lab. And we had a lot of fun with this. Let's talk a little bit about the people here. As we said, these people were predominantly African Creole. This was Jill. Jill was an American that married one of the local guys, a guy named Emmett. And she was a really sweet gal. These people were ebony black. A lot of them came from, their heritage was from the Nebo tribe in Africa. The kids were really, really cute. The average woman in this little village during her reproductive lifetime would have 16 pregnancies. And of the 16, she'd raised maybe 5 or 6. So infant mortality was quite high. And these kids were treasures. This gentleman told me that this was one of twins. The other one had passed away just a short time before that. I have no idea what the joke was for these little girls, but whatever it was pretty good. The children were definitely treasures. This was Hank. Hank was an American expat that retired from the Navy, spent 30 years in the Navy, and found his way down to Belize. He lived by himself. And he was kind of the village handyman. If somebody needed something done, old Hank would figure out how to do it. And he served his role there in the village. This was a little Mayan lady that brought her kids. She had traveled for 2 or 3 days to get to see us. She had heard we were there and set up shop. People waiting to be seen outside the clinic. It was hot when we were working there. I'd say the temperature was well over 100 degrees out in the sun. And these people would stay for hours and hours waiting to be seen. This was the village council that I talked about a while ago. They were elected by the village, and each one of them had a specific role. One of these individuals, not going to tell you which one it is, was the director of public works. Can you imagine? To be in this kind of an environment and to be in such a primitive state, they were incredibly hip and sophisticated. And they took their responsibilities very, very seriously. This man here was Mr. Walter Goff. He was one of my buddies. He was the local justice of the peace. This guy here was the nominal mayor. I got to tell you a little bit about him. His name was Lincoln McSweeney. Now, Mr. McSweeney was born in Gales Point, and when he became high school age, immigrated to the United States, ultimately wound up in Southern California in the Los Angeles area, and he became the first black stuntman in the movie industry. He was one of the founders of the Screen Actors Guild. And very, very fascinating man. But anyway, he made a lot of money in the movie business. He actually, how many of you remember the movie Smokey and the Bandit, like several years ago? All right. He was the guy that drove the car for all the stunts that happened, and Smokey and the Bandits. But nevertheless, very interesting guy, and because of his ties to this little village, we got to know him very well and spent quite a bit of time with him. But anyway, a group of really interesting people. And you can see it was hot when we took those pictures. You know, I was certainly sweating. And these were people that were waiting to be seen, and they would usually dress up in whatever their finest clothes were. I have no idea why this person had 2 hats on, but they did. Anyway, interviews. We tried to get to know these people on a personal level. When the team first would come to the village, they would spend at least a half a day visiting the individuals in their homes and talking about whatever they wanted to talk about, finding out about them, getting to know them as individuals, and inviting them to come to our clinic operation, and they did. Now, common conditions we saw: allergies, joint pains, headaches, asthma, diabetics. In this village, there were 30 different diabetic patients. And we were able to supply those patients for a full year of anti-diabetic oral medications, which was a tremendous help to them, because otherwise they either didn't have it or had to journey a great distance to get the medication. Hypertension, again, another very common issue. We were able to provide anti-hypertensive medications. Parasites. You know, to be a tropical paradise, it's a hazardous place to live. It really is. There's lots of stuff that can get you out there. Scabies, another skin problem a lot of the kids had. There were occasional fevers, coughs, spectrum of lesions. We removed a number of basal cell carcinomas and things of that sort. Spectrum of dental problems, abscesses, teeth that needed fillings, tooth replacement. And then our communications people spent a lot of time talking about preventive medical and dental care. Now, this was all part of the bigger picture, okay? This was all just one small component of the overall mission outreach of the group. Now, this was our dental team. This was my group of students, and this was our clinic operation. Transporting all this stuff was a real ordeal. I can't begin to tell you what was involved with that. Anyway, people waiting to be seen, patients being treated. Now, this was a fairly common situation we would see in some of the kids. Can you imagine the misery that this child had gone through? You know, I mean, there was no treatment for that available to her before we got there. But she was taken care of. Now, one of the things that was a specific request that we got from the village council was to replace teeth. Now, these pictures here, this was a young woman who was 19 years old, already had 4 children, okay, single mom. And anyway, she was presented in this situation. Her concern was, and now bear in mind, there was probably a lot of pain associated with this along the way, but her concern was if she lost these teeth, she was going to be ugly and nobody would have anything to do with her. Now, for a 19-year-old young woman, I think that's a pretty serious thing. So anyway, what we were able to do, we went in and we removed the worst of the teeth. And this was immediately post-operatively. This tooth right here, we were able to repair it. Now, 24 hours later, it's healed. 24 hours. All right. See the new teeth she's got? Smile says it all. This is Dilroy. Dilroy was the son of one of the ladies that cooked for us. And Dilroy had lost his front teeth. And he was concerned about it because he was interested in the young ladies and they didn't want to have anything to do with him. So he went to one of my dental students. I call it Joe Workman's All-Night Dental Emporium. And Joe took impressions on him. Come on. Clicker's quit working. Can you advance that for me? The clicker's quit working. Anyway, one of the things that we did, we were there for a limited amount of time, usually less than 2 weeks. And as a result, in order to maximize the time availability, we worked sometimes through the night, taking care of people. And that was something that they expected. Technology. And we'll get it fixed here in a second. Anyway, anybody have any questions while we're waiting on that? Yes.
What was the biggest challenge you encountered? Biggest challenge you encountered.
What's that?
What was the biggest challenge that you encountered while on the mission?
The biggest challenge that we encountered on the mission. Oh my. I would say probably there were two. First of all, acquiring the material that we needed, in the way of equipment, medications, and so forth, and then getting it transported to a remote location like that. That was a real problem. Transportation in the country, largely school buses. And a lot of them, it's an interesting thing. There's a company here in Kentucky that's down in Murray, Kentucky, called Taylor Bus Company. And Taylor Bus Company is the largest used school bus dealer in the world. And I saw buses down in Belize that were Kentucky school buses. Okay? And they use these just like, we would have a Greyhound or something like that. And this becomes the mode of transportation. Well, when you get on one of these buses, there may be somebody on the bus with a bunch of chickens, a goat, or whatever. There's everything on these buses. And what we had to do was make arrangements with the companies that own these to transport our stuff, and that involved negotiations and a certain amount of palm greasing and all that stuff. And but that was probably the biggest issue. Yes.
What was the saddest part about?
The saddest part, there were people that had conditions that really there was no good treatment for. There was one, I remember one young man in the village that was cerebral palsy, and there was no infrastructure to take care of him, and he didn't have a father, as his mom was responsible, and neighbors and what have you were taking care of him, but because of his condition he had a lot of ulcers and a lot of bed sores and things of that sort, and other than providing some antibiotic ointments and what have you, that's really about all we could do for him. It was really bad. Yes.
Also, I would have brought a generator.
A generator?
It's all right if you didn't.
I'm sorry?
It's all right if you didn't.
Are you talking about the railroad locomotives?
Yeah.
Well, you see railroad locomotives, like the engines that pull the trains down. That was what generated the electrical power. And like I said, there were 5 of them scattered around the country that provided. That what?
If that thing has enough horsepower to carry hundreds of hearts, then it can easily power a village.
Well, it was a bit of a problem. Okay, you got it working now? All right. Sorry about that. This is an impression, okay, and this was a mold, in essence, of Dilroy's mouth. And once that was done, this was Dilroy before, that's Dilroy afterwards. Some more cases. This is fairly typical of what we were able to do. I really liked this one. I thought this was a pretty nice case right here. This lady's husband brought her, I forget what the distance was. It was, I don't know, 50 or 60 miles. And I don't know whether he was tired of looking at her the way she was or what. But anyway, that was after we got finished with it. This was a student that his teacher, he was in Belize City, which was by road or by pathway to get there was almost 60 miles away. And he was a student that she felt like he was a gifted student and needed a break in life. And so she made arrangements to have him brought down to us. And anyway, we got him taken care of.
False teeth?
Yeah, false teeth, yeah. Okay, we saw this kind of thing fairly often as well. This kid was playing in the street. I don't know what he stepped on, a shell or what, but he got a pretty bad cut there. And there wasn't really any way to numb him up or any anesthesia. So go faster. Oh, this is a good part. But anyway, got this taken care of. All wrapped up. The next day he was out playing soccer again. So, all right. Now, take your Bibles again and let's read this. This is an important part. So this is where I want to finish up my sermon. 1 Corinthians 12. Okay, we'll start with verse 4. Now there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. There are varieties of service, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who empowers them all in everyone. To each is given the manifestations of the Spirit for the common good. Let me read that again. This is important. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. For to one is given through the Spirit the utterance of wisdom, and to another the utterance of knowledge according to the same Spirit. To another faith by the same Spirit. To another gifts of healing by one Spirit. To another the workings of miracles. To another prophecy. To another, the ability to distinguish between spirits. To another, various kinds of tongues. And to another, the interpretation of tongues. All these are empowered by one and the same Spirit, who apportions to each one individually as he wills. Now, I was shocked when I saw this. This was a study that was done by the General Conference back in 2018 of church membership. It was a survey that the GC did, and they asked the question, do you feel a deep sense of responsibility for reducing pain and suffering in the world? And what was shocking, only 47% said, yeah, I'm concerned about that. 22% said, yeah, sometimes. 7% said rarely, and 6% said never. All right, what about pain and suffering? Pain and suffering doesn't necessarily have to be medically related. Pain and suffering can be physical impairment. You know, a person gets crippled somehow. They can have physical pain. Idiopathic pain that has no cause, but they still hurt. Disfigurement. You know, we see that ever so often. The loss of quality of life. The loss of enjoyment of life. Grief. Depression. Anger. You know, it seems like everybody you talk to anymore is mad about something these days. Anxiety. The loss of companionship. Now let's talk about the gifts of the Spirit that we just read about. The gift of wisdom. Now I'm not talking about education. We've all known people that we would consider to be wise people. In my life, I've known individuals that had no education that were incredibly wise people. It's a gift. The gift of knowledge. Not everybody has a chance to get an education, to gain knowledge, but some do, with or without the educational process. The gift of faith. You know, there are people that, and again, I hadn't really thought about it that way. There are people who are intrinsically faithful people. There are people that have faith, and there are others that don't. It's a gift. The gift of financial wisdom. I think about people in our congregation, you know, that have financial wisdom. They know how to manage businesses. You know, people like Sam or people like George Dunham, you know, Rich Wilson, people like that. Gift of healing. Well, that, you know, there's a number of people in this congregation that have that. The gift of, let's see, I can't see it there. Gift of miracles. Have any of you experienced miracles? And what was the medium for it? Did someone aid in that? Yeah. Gift of prophecy. The gift of discerning spirits. That's an important one. The gift of discerning spirits. Have you ever met somebody that you just felt uneasy about? Okay, that's a gift. The gift of tongues. And I'm not talking about, you know, what you see on TV. I'm talking about people who intrinsically are able to absorb and do foreign languages. I had 2 years of Latin and 2 years of German, and I don't speak either one of them, okay? But there are people who just intrinsically can pick up a language. They can be someplace and in a matter of a very short time be very fluent in the local tongue. Likewise, there are people that are gifted in interpreting. And that just, I can't get my head around that. I don't know how that works. The gift of administration. George, Tony, guys like you, they're gifted. The gift of help. I think of Rose Cooper. You know, people like this in our congregation are gifted individuals. Now, some say that we go to church to meet God, and it shouldn't be used as a social club. Now, I disagree with that. Acts 2:42 says this, and they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in the breaking of bread and in prayers. Acts 2:46 and 47 says this, they broke bread in their homes and ate together, and with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. People should join the church because of the doctrines or the truth, but they should stay because of the friends that they have in church. Now, so, do we want to be missionaries? If we'll use our spiritual gifts, the ones that we pray for, our church will become a mission church.